While many Texas State students know Rio Vista Park as a fun place to hang out with their friends or go tubing, just 60 years ago this area looked much different. The area by Rio Vista Park was a vibrant Hispanic, Mexican, and Tejano community in which hundreds of families lived and, owned homes, land, and really contribute to the San Marcos economy. One of these families was the Garza family, and they were one of many Hispanic families in San Marcos who brought their family to the city, bought land, and built their home right along the river.
My name is Garza Hernandez. My great-grandfather Ignacio was what you could say a trucker, but back then there wasn't trucks, it was a buggy. He would deliver supplies to this area, and so he packed up the family and brought them here, and they began to purchase some of the very first property in the Katy edition, and they didn't just buy one property, they bought several. And then of course, my grandparents bought more properties and were able to provide opportunities for other Mexican-American families to have homes.
The Mexican-American community around what we now know today as Rio Vista Park, over 50% of these families owned their homes. The history of Hispanic land ownership and home ownership was very important to these families.
As we went through researching their history, the Center for the Study of the Southwest found out that we were working on an untold historical marker. They offered on as a research assistant. She had access to archives at the university that we didn't have, and she was able to pull up a bunch of media documents that we hadn't even found. And that's when we began to see the involvement of urban renewal in the neighborhood, and that's where it took it.
The 1960s nationally was a really big moment for urban renewal or urban revitalization, which basically meant that cities were increasingly looking to build new roads, build parks, build recreation centers, and kind of build their own tourist economies. And the same thing was happening in San Marcos in 1960 with the formation of the Urban Renewal Agency, or the URA. They increased their influence with a special election in 1962. They began instituting urban renewal projects across the city. The URA's major project was the General Neighborhood Renewal Program. They sought to clear out areas near San Marcos River to build parks and tourism spaces so that the city could eventually benefit from a tourist economy. For families like the Garzas, urban renewal was really a devastating project. It meant that they were subject to litigation and eminent domain claims from the URA and from the city, which oftentimes they lost, effectively displacing these families who had lived in San Marcos for decades.
There was no fighting eminent domain. They lost the history, they lost generational wealth, and people lost their community. Many of the families ended up relocating to Sunset Acres, which is on the east side of 35. Not only did they lose their community, but they moved into a community that was not as developed. They didn't have the pecan trees there, they don't have a river, they don't have the amenities that this neighborhood had. And then many of the businesses that were owned by residents of this neighborhood ended up getting closed down as well.
Although urban renewal was very exciting and brought huge amounts of financial success to San Marcos economy because of tourism and because of recreation, it is very unfortunate that we'll never know what kinds of benefits this community could have brought to San Marcos. Our proposal about the Garza family and the history of Hispanic land ownership along the San Marcos River was one proposal accepted to get an undertold historical marker, which will be placed in Rio Vista Park.
Many of our young people today do not know the history. They do not know that their families contributed to the economy, they contributed to the growth of this community, that many of them were actual community leaders. I think it's important for our kids to get the history, because if we don't provide it for them, they're not going to get it anywhere else.
I think telling these stories about underrepresented communities who oftentimes have their history covered up or erased is very important, because Texas State is a Hispanic serving institution, and to share this, very important history with students who maybe don't feel so at home in San Marcos, it's a great opportunity for people to know that they do belong and they have a community here in San Marcos.